Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to BCFSA's briefing for our report, Enhancing Consumer Protection in BC's Real Estate Market, which we have delivered to the Minister of Finance. I'm Sarah Lusk, BCFSA's Director of Communications, and I'm joined here today by our CEO and BC's Superintendent of Real Estate, Blair Morrison, along with Saskia Tolsma, VP of Stakeholder Engagement, and Thomas Toller, our Director of Policy. As a visitor on this land, I would like to begin to acknowledge that the offices of BC Financial Services Authority are located in the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Please join me in a moment of reflection to show our respect for the territories we reside on and to honor the diverse Indigenous peoples who have lived and worked on this land historically and presently. A reminder to everyone on the line that the information from today's briefing is embargoed until 1:15 p.m. and we will be holding a Q&A session once the presentation has concluded. Please note, as this is a webinar format, you will not be able to record on your desktop. However, we are making a recording and we'll share a link immediately after this concludes with interested media. To ask questions, you must use the media dial-in number provided in the chat and on the media advisory. To join the question queue, you may press star, then 1 on your telephone keypad. Should you need assistance during the conference call, you may signal an operator by pressing star, then 0. The same applies when we move to the conference call with the Minister after our briefing. Everything remains the same as noted on the advisory. I will repeat this all again later for you. Today's agenda is comprehensive, and we have a lot of content to get through, but we will do this at a good pace as we know this is late in the day for you. I will now hand over to our first presenter, Blair Morrison, our CEO and the Superintendent of Real Estate, who will provide some background on who BCFSA is, the work we undertook, and our advice. Over to you, Blair.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. As Sarah mentioned, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview not only of BCFSA but of the process. So if I could go to the next slide. BCFSA, the BC Financial Services Authority, is the integrated regulator of BC's financial service sector. And as you can see on that slide, the industries and groups we regulate and oversee is quite broad. Everything from credit unions to pension plans to real estate. The financial service sector is one of the most important sectors in British Columbia. It drives the economy and drives the overall prosperity of the province. But it's also important for individual British Columbians in terms of the decisions they make in their lives. Deciding to retire, is my pension plan going to be there and provide the benefits that I think it's going to be? If I'm going to enter into an insurance policy, is that going to reduce the risk that I'm trying? Where do I deposit my money? Can I deposit in this credit union? And of course, the most important financial decision that most of us have to do in our lifetime, the buying and selling of the home. BCFSA is focused on confidence in the marketplace. We want to instill confidence and ensure confidence in this sector. And confidence has been driven by a number of different things, but clearly consumer protection, transparency, a fair play approach to transactions is clearly where we're focused. And what we're going to talk about today is an aspect of confidence which relates to consumer protection. Next slide, please. If I can take you back to the fall, just to provide a little context of where we are right now. On November of 2021, the Minister of Finance announced that the Government of British Columbia was going to create a legislated cooling off period for the resale and newly built homes. And when we say cooling off, we're also using that term interchangeably with the home buyer protection period. We'll try to be consistent as we can, but you can swap those words in and out. The Minister also at that time directed BCFSA as the regulator to undertake a consultation and engage with stakeholders on essentially 3 points. The first point was those parameters for that cooling off period or that home buyer protection period. What does it look like? What should it look like? The Minister also asked us to look into issues concerning unconditional offers and were there measures that we could add in terms of consumer protection, and also alternatives or enhancements to the blind bidding process, which is the current state of how houses are bought and sold in the province. It's important to note that this project or this work was not directed at housing affordability. It is about consumer protection. And that what it has always been about and what it is about today. The issues of housing affordability are important, and we acknowledge that, but this report was not an attempt to address those at all. This was about consumer protection. Next slide, please. The team I have with me today is going to go through the advice in a fair amount of detail, but I wanted to give you two overarching principles or perspectives as you listen to this briefing and as we start the conversation and the dialogue over the next couple of days. This is a package of enhancements, again, focused on consumer protection. We have considered a number of enhancements to an overall process that deals with the life cycle of the real estate transaction, from where the property is listed to how we go through and get a firm agreement of purchase and sale. The package involved trade-offs between different aspects of that, and it should seem to be as a total suite of offerings. During the conversations leading up to the consultation and in the consultation itself, there were three themes that were raised fairly frequently. Will this apply in a hot market? Will this apply in a not hot market? How do you deal with the different regional differences in British Columbia? And how do you deal with the rights of buyers and sellers? And are you impacting one negatively while you're trying to improve the situation for another? The way we look at the advice today is this is a core, basic set of consumer protections that we think should apply in all markets, hot, cold, indifferent. We think it should apply to all regions of British Columbia. This is core, basic protections that all British Columbians are entitled to. And yes, it's hard to say balance, but when we considered the various parameters of the advice, we have considered the seller. Buyers often become sellers, and there are two sides to this coin. The bottom line is the advice relates to enhancements, but it is enhancements that we think apply in all markets, across all regions, and will be good ultimately for buyers and sellers. Next slide, please. This is a graphic that the team is going to jump into and provide a little bit more detail on. But as we start and as you think about what we're going to talk about and as you read the report, three things on this graphic. The first is that blue arrow in the middle, and that is the home buyer protection period. That's the cooling off period. And as you'll hear from the team, as you'll read in the report, our advice is a 3 business day clear period. If you go up to the top of the spectrum, the top of how a transaction occurs, you'll see the red line. And the red arrow reflects a advice that we are giving to the government today that involves a pre-offer period, a 5 business day pre-offer period where offers cannot be accepted, where it'll give time for buyers to understand the property, potentially do due diligence in advance of it. But we are asking for this period to deal with a bunch of things, including to address bully offers. And the last point is the black arrow at the bottom and then the black disclosure into black text. What we're talking about here is disclosure. We're talking about enhancements to improve transparency. And again, when you come back to confidence in a marketplace, we think a market that has high consumer confidence, that has a high degree of transparency, is the kind of marketplace we want to see in British Columbia. Next slide, please. In terms of implementation considerations, I just want to be clear, we are providing advice as directed by the government. The government needs to consider this advice and then decide on next steps. As the government does that, we will of course be available for consultation and dialogue. We do acknowledge that what we're proposing here is unique. It is impacting contract law, it is impacting transactions that have occurred in this province for 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years. We need to make sure that we do this right. We need to engage and have conversations and discussions with the real estate professionals, whether or not they be lawyers or real estate licensees. We need to make sure that the standard forms and the practices are up to date. Most important, though, is we need to make sure that the public, the consumers, understand what this new world looks like. Again, we are giving advice to the government. We are open for the conversation, and we'll see where that goes. So before I turn it over to the team for a little bit more of an in-depth conversation, the next slide is the last slide I'll address. The government has received the report. We want to review, we want to sit down and talk to them about it and provide more details. The government may have different perspectives, different things they might want to add, and we certainly look forward to playing our role as the regulator and as a key stakeholder in the overall conversation as the government makes a move forward to protect consumers in the BC real estate market. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Saskia Tolsma. Saskia is our VP of Stakeholder Engagement, and she is going to give a sense to all of you on the consultation process and what we went through in order to inform our report. So with that, over to Saskia.
Thanks, Blair. So given the importance of this issue, we certainly set out to undertake a quite broad and comprehensive consultation process. Our goals were to hear diverse perspectives, so go beyond just the direct real estate industry. We wanted to support informed participation amongst our participants and to provide targeted input back to the government. So based on the terms of reference that BCFSA was given, how do we operationalize the cooling off period or the home buyer protection period? So with that, on the next slide, I'll outline for you the diversity of participants that participated in our process. We heard from over 140 individuals and groups through over 20 consultation sessions in January and February of this past year. We spoke with organized real estate, so the British Columbia Real Estate Association, the respective real estate member boards across the region, so the island, the interior, the north, the lower mainland. And certainly they brought to bear certain perspectives and suggestions which we took seriously and have incorporated where appropriate. We spoke to the legal community with the understanding that the changes under consideration today are really quite fundamental to the transaction process and are significant from a legal perspective. We spoke to financial services providers, mortgage brokers, lenders, insurance providers. We spoke to the home inspectors, appraisers, and then we also brought a public interest lens to this consultation. So we spoke to both public sector and Crown agencies, and then we brought to bear different perspectives from public interest organizations and economists and academics who specialize in the real estate industry, and also spoke to some communities to understand the impacts of these changes on housing in those communities. So in that context, happy to give you a bit of a sense of what the overall feedback was from the consultation process. Next slide, please. And this really forms the basis upon which that we built out the advice that we're now providing to government today. So the first piece is really there is broad support for enhanced due diligence. And all market participants acknowledge the importance for buyers to undertake this due diligence, whether it's a home inspection or really accessing the financing. But the crux of the issue and the crux of the discussion was really about how do we create space and time for that due diligence to occur. And there were a variety of perspectives when we talked about operationalizing the home buyer protection period. And it was not unanimous within groups or across groups the best way to operationalize it. But we did really hear that the home buyer protection period is a significant change to the real estate contract and transaction process. And so as Blair outlined, the materiality of that change prompted advice with respect to unintended consequences and caution to implement with an appropriate lead time to make the changes. And certainly we heard throughout the consultation sessions a need to consider both buyers and sellers, and that buyers are most often sellers. And our advice is really targeted on that sweet spot where we provide a backstop of due diligence for a buyer while not tying up the property for the seller. And we also heard that the market varies quite significantly across BC. And some regions may have a hot market and some regions may have a cool market. And so in that context, we really need to make our advice back to government durable in a hot market, a cool market, or maybe a cooling market. So the final piece I'll leave you with before turning to Thomas, who will outline the advice, is that there was also broad support for enhanced transparency measures and a real consensus that the more transparency that can be brought to bear in a real estate transaction process that improves the confidence of both buyers and sellers in the market is ultimately a win for the province. So with that in mind, I'm happy to pass over to Thomas Tuller, who will lead you through the advice that we're presenting today.
Thanks very much, Saskia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas Toller. I'm the Director of Policy at BCFSA. Really pleased to be here with you all today to discuss our advice to government on the parameters of the home buyer protection period and some additional measures we think can increase consumer protections for British Columbians who are looking to buy and sell real estate. We appreciate there's a lot of information to cover today, and the information is quite complex. You should have the presentation as a takeaway for reference later. We'll be happy to answer questions and clarify key points following my high-level overview. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with our advice on the home buyer protection period. First up, a bit of a refresher. The provincial government's home buyer protection period provides a time frame after an offer has been accepted for a buyer to withdraw from the agreement before they are legally bound to a purchase. During this time, a buyer can conduct additional due diligence activities such as a home inspection, confirm financing, or seek legal advice to help ensure they've made a well-informed decision. I'm going to walk you through our advice in the following key areas: the duration of the home buyer protection period, waivers and exemptions to the period, measures to address frivolous offers, including a termination fee and buyer disclosure of other active offers, and finally, access to property. Next slide, please. So first up, the duration of the home buyer protection period. We're advising government on a home buyer protection period that is 3 clear business days, beginning the first business day following the acceptance of an offer. Our advice in this area strongly considers the interests of both buyers and sellers and takes into consideration the feedback we heard from stakeholders that the longer the period of time, the greater the potential for unintended consequences and knock-on effects on other real estate transactions. 3 days will allow buyers an opportunity to conduct important due diligence, for example, getting a home inspection, confirming financing, and generally reassessing their offer to purchase. It also considers the needs of the seller and provides minimal disruption to the sale process, allowing a property to be back on the market shortly if a deal collapses. Next slide, please. On the subject of waivers, which mean the ability of a buyer to waive their right to the home buyer protection period, we're advising government that the home buyer protection period should not be waivable. We see the recent pressure on buyers to submit unconditional offers being reproduced as pressure on buyers to waive their right to the home buyer protection period, which is, of course, contrary to the policy intent. For exemptions, which are classes of transactions that do not receive a home buyer protection period, we're advising government that there should be narrow exemptions for court-ordered sales, sales by auction, and sales where the purchaser has previously made an offer on the same property. In situations where a narrow exemption applies, both parties of the sale can determine upfront whether the sale is subject to the home buyer protection period, and that provides for certainty and clarity in the transaction process. Next slide, please. The potential for frivolous offers or non-serious offers was a big topic of discussion in our consultations. Stakeholders expressed concern, for example, with buyers placing multiple offers on different homes and then using the home buyer protection period to pick which home they like best while backing out of the other deals. To address this issue, we're advising government to include a termination fee, also known as a rescission fee, where a buyer withdraws from a purchase. A fee in the range of 0.1 to 0.5% of the purchase price, or $1,000 to $5,000 on $1 million home, mirrors the fees charged in other jurisdictions that have implemented a home buyer protection period, and it's intended to deter such frivolous offers. Next slide, please. As a secondary measure to address frivolous offers, we're also advising government to consider a requirement for a buyer to make a disclosure to the seller if they have other active offers pending. In other words, in situations where a buyer has placed an offer on multiple homes simultaneously, they would need to tell the seller. This would help sellers gauge the seriousness of an offer and the potential that the buyer may walk away for reasons other than due diligence. Next slide, please. Finally, BCFSA's last piece of advice to government on the home buyer protection period concerns access to the property. In our consultations, we heard concerns about sellers potentially refusing access to the property for the buyer to conduct due diligence, such as a home inspection, again, contrary to the policy intent. An explicit requirement around reasonable access to the property would ensure due diligence activities like home inspections could be undertaken without frustrating the home buyer protection period. Next slide, please. In the next section, I'm going to highlight some of our advice on additional measures to enhance transparency and consumer protection in the real estate transaction process. Next slide. Thank you. So on this slide, which you briefly saw earlier, it provides a bit of an overview of our advice at a high level. Again, in thinking this through, we've sought to increase consumer protection and transparency across the real estate transaction process. So at the front end, with enhanced property disclosures and a mandatory 5-day pre-offer period, in the core part of the transaction with advice around transparency in the bidding process, in addition to the home buyer protection period, and at the back end after a transaction has gone firm, with additional disclosure of information to buyers who are part of the bidding process. I'm going to walk you through our advice in each of these areas. Next slide. First up is the pre-offer period, before someone even submits an offer on a property. We're providing advice to government on two key measures here. First, we heard strongly from the real estate community and other affiliated industries about the importance of preparation and upfront due diligence by buyers. In addition to the 3-day home buyer protection period, we're advising government to introduce a 5-day pre-offer period. This would be a minimum time a property must spend on the market before any offer can be accepted by a seller. We think that this provides enhanced opportunities for due diligence, particularly in relation to enhanced disclosures at the time of listing, which I'll discuss in a moment. We think that the pre-offer period can also help to address bully offers, which came up repeatedly in our consultation. Bully offers are offers that come in shortly after listing, and they pressure the seller to make a time-constrained decision before they've had a chance to test the market. These offers also exclude other buyers from an opportunity to compete on a property. A pre-offer period can help to level the playing field for buyers and sellers. A second key piece of our advice to government in the pre-offer period is greater upfront disclosure of information about the property. We think that both the property disclosure statement, which is typically completed by the seller, and strata documents, when you're buying a condominium, should be provided at the time of listing or marketing a property for sale. This enhanced transparency at the front end will allow buyers to get access to these documents before they submit an offer and not after they've already made one. Next slide, please. As part of our remit, we were asked by government to examine the current blind bidding system of real estate transactions. Blind bidding is the process by which buyers submit their offers without any knowledge of competing bids, and it's the dominant real estate transaction model used in BC today. In this area, we're advising government to further explore open bid, open-end auction models that are used in some Scandinavian countries, including Norway. In this model, buyers register and receive real-time disclosure of offer information, including prices, while continuing to be able to negotiate the terms of the sale without undue time pressure. We do not think that English-style auctions, like the kind more frequently used in places like Australia, are the way forward, as these models create additional consumer protection concerns for buyers. From a consumer protection perspective, transparency is an important principle, and open bidding is the most transparent way to buy and sell real estate. But there is a caveat that open bidding would be a big shift away from the current bidding process, and we don't know what the potential implications of open bidding would be on home prices or affordability. So we think that more work is needed to explore these implications, and we are advising government to undertake this work. As an interim measure, government could consider a disclosure of offers be provided to buyers where a buyer has been asked to revise their offer in a multiple bid situation. This situation is commonly referred to as a bidding war. The disclosure could include the number of competing offers and the price. Transparency in these situations could considerably improve the information imbalance between buyers and sellers at a critical juncture of the bidding process. And finally, we are advising government to consider requiring inclusion of standard clauses related to financing, home inspection, insurance, and legal advice in any contract of purchase and sale. These clauses are currently optional and are typically added to a contract following discussions with a real estate agent. By making them standard and including them in the contract, consumers may think twice about waiving these important clauses. Next slide, please. We think that there's also room for enhanced transparency following a real estate transaction. After an enforceable contract is in place, BCFSA's advice is to require sellers to provide anonymized disclosure of offers, including the sale price and number of offers, to all those who submitted an offer. People who have submitted an offer on a home shouldn't have to guess how many other offers there were, or that their offer was among those that were considered. A simple after-the-fact disclosure will enhance confidence in the real estate transaction process. Next slide, please. And one more. Thanks. As noted, BCFSA's advice is intended to be considered as a holistic package of measures designed to enhance transparency and consumer protections across the transaction process. Our advice includes enhanced upfront disclosure of property information during a mandatory 5-day pre-offer period. Our advice includes a non-waivable 3-day home buyer protection period and advice to further consider open bid, open-end auction formats to increase transparency. And our advice includes enhanced disclosures after a transaction has become firm so that people who have submitted an offer have increased transparency about the bidding process. Together, we're confident that our advice to government, if implemented, will enhance protections for consumers buying and selling real estate in British Columbia. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sarah to moderate any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. We will now have some time for some questions. The only way to ask a question is on the media dial-in number, which is provided in the chat, and it was also noted in the media advisory. Once again, to join the question queue, you may press star, then 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledgement to your request. To withdraw your question, press star, then 2. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick it up and use your handset before pressing any keys. In the interest, if there's too many questions, you're asked to limit yourself to 1 question with 1 supplemental, and you're welcome to rejoin the queue if needed. First question on the phone line is from Rob Shaw from Czech News. Rob, over to you.
Thanks. So it looks like, and just correct me if I'm wrong here in the characterization, but it looks like you've taken the real estate sector's pre-offer ask and the government's cooling off period ask and smashed them together into one package. Is that essentially, like from the outside, that's what the feedback kind of looked like, that the real estate sector wanted this, government wanted that, you put them together into one package, is that it?
So thanks, Rob. It's Blair Morrison. Thanks for your question. What I think came out of the consultation was very diverse, wide-ranging, and conflicting reviews. And what we've been careful to say is we've taken that advice which informs our advice to government. I wouldn't want to say that that is what exactly the Real Estate Association proposed, because there are probably things in this overall advice that they may not be happy with. That's better a conversation with you from them. At the end of the day, the government asked us to provide advice on the parameters of the cooling off. That was a given, and we've done that. But also through the period, through the consultation, we've heard additional disclosure, enhanced transparency, and that's formed it. And also we have heard from other people, including the BC Real Estate Association, about a pre-offer period and how that could work. So the bottom line is, it is no one's advice, because I wouldn't want anybody to be felt like we're calling them out as this is their advice. It's a combination of the government's direction on cooling off, provide the parameters, and what we heard through all of the conversations, some of which were divergent, some of which were the same, but we've come to a scenario that says if we're focused on consumer protection in this province, we think this piece of advice works.
Thanks, Blair. We'll see if there's a few more minutes here or a few more seconds if there's any other questions. I don't see any in the queue. So we'll pause for now for a few minutes, and then we'll begin the media availability with Minister Robinson. No need to change location, but if you do have a question for that question period after the availability, you will again need to stay in the media dial-in number, which is in the chat. Please also note the media release, the report, which includes the executive summary, will be distributed shortly. Again, those interested in a recording, please reach out to me directly or email media@bcfsa.ca. And we'll move over and join with Minister Robinson in just a moment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Selena Robinson. I'm the Minister of Finance, and I want to first of all just say how great that music was. I was getting the vibe. Um, Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Kwikwetlem First Nation. And I have tremendous gratitude for the First Nations generosity and spirit as I make my home here, live, work, play, and learn on their territories. And I want to thank members of the media for joining us today for another important step forward in our efforts to enhance consumer protection for homebuyers in British Columbia. Housing remains a top concern for people in British Columbia and a top priority for our government. In recent years, we have heard from prospective homebuyers, mortgage brokers, home inspectors about buyers feeling pressure to take unreasonable risks, such as waiving home inspections, that have led to horror stories. And they're horror stories that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Right now, this is a system that only works for the handful of people making a lot of money, not for everyday people who need protection when buying a home. This winter, we responded by asking BC's independent real estate regulator to consult with stakeholders, both on how to best implement a homebuyer protection period in British Columbia, as well as other opportunities to improve other elements of the process, like blind bidding and improved transparency. This week, I received the BC Financial Services Authority's report on ways to improve protection for homebuyers, including detailed advice on how to implement a homebuyer protection period. And I want to take a moment to thank the BCFSA staff for their extensive consultation with industry stakeholders, and Blair Morrison and the BCFSA CEO and Superintendent of Real Estate for all of his work on this important file. And while I know that a technical briefing was provided earlier, I believe that Blair has some additional comments to make, a brief overview for those watching now of the findings and advice to government. Blair?
So thank you, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone, as well. As the Minister mentioned today, BCFSA, BC Financial Services Authority, has delivered its report Enhancing Consumer Protection in BC's Real Estate Market to the Minister of Finance. This report provides advice to the governments on the parameters of a legislative homebuyer protection period, also known as a cooling off period, as well as potential additional measures, consumer protection measures, to address the risks associated with unconditional offers and blind bidding. As the Minister mentioned, BCFSA conducted a series of in-depth consultations to inform this report. This included 20 virtual consultation sessions and involved over 140 participants from across the province. During the consultation period, we engaged in an open and transparent manner. The input we received during the consultation was wide-ranging, broad-based, and in some cases, participants expressed divergent views on the issues under consultation. We considered that feedback and input in informing our advice. We have now completed the work and are pleased to present the report to the government today. Our work examined consumer protection in the context of the life cycle of the real estate transaction. And our advice today reflects that approach. Our advice is considered to be a cohesive, comprehensive package of measures designed to improve consumer protection. In light of the government's decision to move forward with a homebuyer's protection plan and consistent with its terms of reference, we have provided the requested advice to the government regarding those parameters for that period. It is important to note that the consultation did not canvass or was not intended to canvass the merits of a cooling off period. As well, we all recognize the challenge of housing affordability and the hot market in this province, but we were not asked to consider those issues related to housing affordability in our report. The focus on this effort, the focus on the report, was always and remains on consumer protection. I'll give a highlight of the couple of pieces of key advice to the government. The report itself will be made available, and we're pleased to continue the conversation. The three key points would be, with respect to the home buyer protection period, BCFSA's advice is 3 clear business days long, a period that is non-waivable, has very narrow exemptions in certain circumstances, and has a modest termination fee involved. In addition to the home buyer protection period, our advice to government is to establish a 5-business day pre-offer period, the minimum time a property can be on the market before any offer can be accepted. Our advice also includes improved transparency by requiring increased disclosure. Again, this is issues that related to home buyers and protections. We, where possible, have tried to consider the different regions, the different considerations, the different markets. We think this is core, basic, good consumer protection that should apply throughout British Columbia for all British Columbians. Again, the focus was not simply just on a post-offer period or a pre-offer period, but along the continuum. As BC's regulator for financial services sector, including real estate, our focus is on ensuring confidence in the sector. When consumers are protected, where there is transparency in the market, that increases confidence. Our advice on this report is fully aligned with our regulatory focus. I want to thank the very many participants for their thoughtful contributions during the consultation period. Their input was valuable in shaping our advice. I am very proud of the team here at BCFSA and the work they do every day in support of British Columbians. However, I do want to specifically thank the group that worked on this report for their tremendous effort. With that, Minister, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. We are now reviewing the report and determining how to use your advice to design measures that will best protect people and strengthen public confidence in the real estate market. I look forward to sharing details on those measures and when they will come into effect as the work moves forward. So again, thank you to you and your team for this very valuable report. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Minister. Welcome to the media again. Once again, to join the question queue, you may press star and then 1 on your telephone keypad, and you'll hear a tone acknowledging your request. To withdraw your question, press star, then 2. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset before pressing any keys. We will now start and take a question, but please limit your questions to 1 question and 1 follow-up. I'll open the floor to Lisa from City News now to ask her question. Lisa.
Hi, Minister. I'm just wondering what the timing is going to look like how long you're thinking you're going to assess this before we'll hear back on a final answer of what recommendations you're going to take and which you won't.
Thank you very much for the question, Lisa. We just received the report. And so our team is looking through it as we speak. I'm still working my way through it as well. And I'm hoping that my expectations that we're going to move as quickly as we can. It's hard to say, pinpoint a date, but let's say that this is very much top of mind for us to move on this.
Lisa, any follow-up questions from you?
Yes, just because I don't know very much about this. So if you decided, or if government decided to go ahead with this, and I don't know if this is a Blair question or a Minister Robinson question, what would be the turnaround time? Let's say June, the government says, the minister says, yes, we're going to go ahead with this. Is this like a year it would take to implement? Is it months? I just don't know how quickly, how nimble the whole system is to implement something of this effect.
So perhaps I'll take a shot, and then Blair, if you have anything that you might want to add. So there's a number of steps that need to happen. So like I said, we've just received the report. And so, understanding the various elements, this is, and again, I want to thank BCFSA for the wholesale view that they've taken here. We've brought in legislation on the homebuyer protection period so that we can take in the information that they've provided us, that we can move relatively quickly. But the other part of it is we know that the industry needs time to adjust and adapt. And so I look forward to discussions with the BCFSA as we look to implement, to make changes to protect consumers going forward. Blair, did you have anything you might want to add?
Minister and Lisa, thank you for the question. The only thing I would say is we understand that there are proposals in our advice that are unique. We do need to have the conversation after the government has had time to consider the advice. We want to make sure this works for the sector, for the real estate licenses, for the lawyers and other parts of that process. But we also want to make sure that it's clear to the public. This is about protecting the public. So an implementation, will require some education. But again, once the government has made its decision, it's been clear, we'll be working and discussing and having conversations with all the participants, including the government, obviously, the real estate sector, to make sure that this can be implemented as efficiently and effectively as possible.
And if I could just add, at the end of the day, this is about consumer protection. So we want to make sure that it works, that it's consumers that we're most interested in making sure that there's tools in place to protect their interests. And so we're going to make sure that we continue those discussions with the BCFSA and others to make sure that we have a system that works fairly for both buyers and sellers.
Thank you, Minister. I'll next go to our next question from Rob Shaw at Czech News. Rob, your first question.
Minister, how could you not accept the advice in this report? I listened to your debate on the legislation, which just passed in the House. You took every question and said you're waiting to get these recommendations back. Why not just accept them as the expert recommendations they are and just implement them? Why do you have to review them when you've been waiting for them this whole time?
So, Rob, thanks for the question. And so I'm eager to move on these elements. I do need to have more discussions with BCFSA and others around what time frame is needed to act on certainly around the buyer protection period. But you'll also note in the body of recommendations, it's certainly the part of the report that I've been able to get through to this point, is that there's a whole range of recommendations that are being proposed, some of which need more information. And we certainly have heard from BCFSA that they're looking at the whole life cycle, I think is what they called it, of the real estate transaction. And so we want to make sure how all the pieces fit. And so we need to make sure, again, that we are reviewing the entire report and acting accordingly once we've had time to digest all of it.
Rob, a follow-up question from you, if there is one.
Sure, thanks. I mean, I guess it's for either of you, but one of the things I've sort of heard from the public since we've been talking about this is how does the cooling off period actually give a person time to get a home inspection when they may have already put in an offer that's accepted that is unconditional? There may not, just because of the competitive nature of the market, they may not have any kind of conditions to use in that cooling off period. So I don't know if that goes to Blair or the minister, but could you sort of functionally explain how that works when the offers may not have it in because they might not be accepted if they had it?
Minister, may I take that and
Sure.
add you to follow up if possible? So thank you, Rob, for the question. I mean, at the end of the day, what we've talked about is a lot of work that needs to get done, and whether or not that means amending the standard forms or agreeing to standard clauses, but the government has mandated this. So the bottom line is that it will be, once it's put into force with all the necessary factors, it will be part of the transaction. There's no getting out of it. It's non-waivable. So at the end of the day, we're hoping to be working with the industry, working with the real estate licenses, working with the bar, the lawyers, in terms of making sure that we are as clear as possible about what this means for the transaction, and as I said, more importantly, or at the most important level, the buyers. So you're going to see adjustments, if I can call it, in the real estate transaction that you're seeing now and in the forms that will bring this into fruition. So once the effective date of the home buyer protection player comes into place, it's in place. And the contracts need to comply with that.
Thank you, Blair. We'll go to our next question, which is from Alyssa Thibault from CTV News. Alyssa, your first question.
Hi there. This is a question for Blair. I just want to clarify the bidding process with the open-end auctions. I'm wondering, so is the recommendation that offers are kind of revealed to other buyers only after the offers have been accepted? So buyers won't see like real-time offers?
So thank you for the question. With respect to the advice that we've given on blind bidding, which is the current process here in British Columbia and across Canada, where you don't know what the bids are, there's been lots of conversations at different levels about, is that fair? Can we bring transparency to it? There's been lots of questions about the English style of offers, the videos you may have seen where people are on the corner and a real estate agent is taking bids like they would for a piece of art or a car. We don't think that works. We don't think that addresses the concerns of consumer protection. But what we did discover, and when we looked outwards, is there is Scandinavian countries that have sort of a modified approach to this, where there is disclosure of bids, but there's also negotiation of the contract. So it's a little bit more open and ultimately gets to the right answer, which is an agreement between a seller and a buyer. So right now, the advice to the government is, this is a huge step. This would be a huge step. Let's spend some time. Let's talk with the industry. Let's see the benefits, and let's see what works, because we do not want unintended consequences. Again, if you go back to the primary focus, we are here to help protect consumers. We want that in order to instill confidence in the market. We didn't see the English style of bidding as doing that, but we did see some alternatives in some Scandinavian countries where there may be an option for us to look at. I hope that was responsive.
Thank you. Alyssa, any follow-up questions from you?
Yes, thank you. And I was wondering if you could maybe mention any of those kind of unintended consequences that you think could arise as to what you would be keeping an eye on.
As I've talked about, the financial service sector, including real estate, is very important to the overall prosperity of the province. It's very important for individual British Columbians who are making some of the most important financial decisions, including buying a home. At the end of the day, we are trying to make sure that this advice is unique. We are going in, somewhat uncharted waters. So we want to make sure that when we implement something that the government has said in terms of advice they'd like us to pursue, we are not impacting the process too negatively. At the end of the day, we are trying to improve consumer protection. So by definition, that will provide some changes in the process. But, when we talk about the length of that cooling off period or the home buyer protection period, we've talked about 3 clear days. And we've talked about that in the context of, okay, what's the number? And during the consultations, we've heard lower, and we certainly heard higher. The bottom line is that 3 number is where we think it's our sweet spot that gives an informed, ready-to-buy buyer who's made an offer that's accepted to do that final check. And it also doesn't unduly punish or harm the seller. If the buyer chooses to withdraw, there is a termination fee, and the buyer and the seller can get the property back on the market fairly quickly.
Thank you, Blair. I see no further questions from the media, so that will conclude our event for today. Just to make everybody aware, the full report, along with the executive summary and the media release, is now on BCFSA's website and will have been distributed to you. Our website, again, is bcfsa.ca, and all those links should be live and the full report there for you now. Thank you, everyone, and appreciate you joining us today.